Staff Sergeant Maria Santos wiped the sweat from her forehead as she counted ammunition boxes in the supply depot at Forward Operating Base Kestrel. The Afghan sun was merciless even at 7 in the morning, and the metal walls of the warehouse were already starting to heat up like an oven. She had been running supplies for 3 tours now, and everyone knew her as the woman who could find anything the soldiers needed, from extra batteries to the specific type of energy bars that kept morale up during long patrols. Maria was not what most people expected when they thought of a supply coordinator. At 5 feet 4 inches and weighing barely 130 pounds, she looked more like someone who should be teaching school back home in Texas than managing military logistics in a war zone. But appearances were deceiving. Maria had grown up on a ranch outside of San, where her grandfather had taught her to shoot cans off fence posts when she was 8 years old. By the time she was 15, she could hit a moving rabbit at 200 yards with her grandfather's old hunting rifle. The other soldiers respected Maria, but they saw her as support staff. She was the person who made sure they had clean socks, hot meals, and enough ammunition for their missions. She was not the person they expected to save their lives. Maria was fine with that perception. She had joined the army to serve her country, and she took pride in keeping the warriors supplied and ready. She did not need glory or recognition. She just wanted to do her job well and make sure everyone came home safe. That morning started like any other. Maria checked her inventory sheets and noticed that Alpha Company was running low on medical supplies. Captain had put in a request for additional first aid kits, antibiotics, and morphine injectors. Maria knew that Alpha Company was heading out on a reconnaissance mission that afternoon, and medical supplies were not something you wanted to run short on in hostile territory. She loaded up her supply truck with everything Captain had requested, plus a few extra items she thought might be useful. Maria had learned over 3 deployments that it was better to pack too much than too little. She threw in extra water purification tablets, additional ammunition for the squad automatic weapons, and even a few chocolate bars that she had been saving for special occasions. The Rangers might tease her about being a mother hen, but they never complained when she anticipated their needs. As Maria drove across the base toward the Alpha Company staging area, she passed groups of soldiers preparing for various missions. Some were checking their weapons, others were studying maps, and a few were trying to grab a few minutes of sleep before heading out into the unknown. Maria had seen this scene hundreds of times, but it never got old. These were good soldiers, young men and women who had volunteered to serve in one of the most dangerous places on Earth. Captain met her at the company area with a grateful smile. "Santos, you're a lifesaver," he said as his soldiers began unloading the medical supplies from her truck. "Intel says we might run into some unfriendly locals on this mission, so having extra medical gear could make all the difference." Maria helped the soldiers organize the supplies and gave Captain a quick rundown of what she had brought. As they worked, she noticed that the captain seemed more tense than usual. His jaw was tight, and he kept glancing at his watch. Maria had been around long enough to read the signs. This was not going to be a routine patrol. "Captain," she said quietly, "is there anything else you need? I've got some extra comm batteries in the truck if you want them." paused in his inventory check and looked at her thoughtfully. "You know what, Santos? Throw those batteries in too, and maybe grab us a couple of those emergency flare guns from the armory. Something tells me we might need every advantage we can get out there." Maria nodded and made a mental note to swing by the armory before her next delivery. She had learned to trust the instincts of experienced officers like Captain. If he was feeling uneasy about the mission, there was probably a good reason for it. As she finished helping with the supplies, Maria found herself thinking about her grandfather's old advice about being prepared for anything. Back at the supply depot, Maria spent the rest of the morning organizing inventory and fielding requests from other units. The second platoon needed replacement batteries for their night vision equipment. The mortar team was running low on high explosive rounds. The communications section needed new radio antennas after losing two in a recent firefight. Maria took care of each request with the same attention to detail that she had learned from her grandfather, who used to say that taking care of the small things was what kept the big things from going wrong. Around noon, Maria decided to take a break and grab some lunch. The dining facility was buzzing with conversation about the various missions going out that afternoon. Alpha Company's reconnaissance patrol was just one of several operations planned for the day. Bravo Company was conducting a vehicle patrol along Highway 1. Charlie Company was setting up a checkpoint near the village of Kandahar, and Delta Company was providing security for a convoy heading to a remote outpost. As Maria ate her lunch, she overheard two intelligence analysts discussing Alpha Company's mission. They were talking in low voices, but she caught enough of the conversation to understand that the Rangers were heading into an area where several IEDs had been discovered in recent weeks. The mission was supposed to last about 6 hours, with the team returning to base before dark. After lunch, Maria returned to her duties with a nagging feeling that something was not quite right. She could not put her finger on what was bothering her, but her grandfather had always taught her to pay attention to her instincts. He used to say that animals in the wild survived by listening to the voice inside their heads that warned them of danger. Humans had the same instinct, but most people had learned to ignore it. Maria decided to take inventory of her personal equipment. As a supply coordinator, she was not expected to carry a full combat load, but she always kept her M4 carbine clean and ready, just in case. She also carried a sidearm, basic first aid supplies, and enough ammunition for a short firefight. That afternoon, something prompted her to add a few extra magazines to her gear, along with a compact spotting scope that she had been using to identify damaged equipment at long range. As the afternoon wore on, Maria found herself checking her watch more frequently than usual. Alpha Company had departed at 1400 hours, and they were expected back by 2000 hours. By 1600 hours, she had finished most of her paperwork and was looking for something to keep her busy. She decided to take a drive around the perimeter of the base to check on some supply caches that had been established at remote guard posts. The perimeter road took Maria past the communications center, where radio operators maintained contact with all the units operating outside the base. As she drove slowly past the building, she noticed more activity than usual. Several senior officers were gathered around the radio equipment, and their body language suggested that they were dealing with something serious. Maria parked her truck and walked casually toward the communications center, hoping to overhear something that might explain the increased activity. As she got closer, she heard the distinctive sound of radio chatter mixed with the harsh static of long-range communications. The radio operators were trying to maintain contact with multiple units, but the quality of the transmissions suggested that at least some of the teams were operating at the edge of their communication range. Alpha 6, this is base, please respond, one of the operators was saying into his microphone. Alpha 6, do you copy? Maria felt a chill run down her spine. Alpha 6 was Captain's call sign. If the communications center was having trouble reaching Alpha Company, it could mean that the Rangers were in trouble. Radio communications could be interrupted by terrain, weather, or equipment problems, but it could also mean that the team was under attack and unable to respond. Without drawing attention to herself, Maria moved closer to the communications center. She could see the radio operator trying different frequencies and adjusting his equipment to get better reception. Other operators were coordinating with aircraft and other ground units to see if anyone had visual contact with Alpha Company. Sir, we lost contact with Alpha 6 approximately 20 minutes ago. One of the operators was reporting to a lieutenant colonel who had just arrived at the communications center. Their last transmission indicated they were approaching the target area and everything was routine. The lieutenant colonel frowned and studied a map that was spread out on a nearby table. Maria could see red pins marking the positions of various units, with Alpha Company's last known location marked with a blue pin about 15 kilometers northeast of the base. The area was a maze of rocky hills and narrow valleys that provided plenty of concealment for enemy fighters. What about surveillance assets? The lieutenant colonel asked. Do we have any eyes on their position? Negative, sir, the operator replied. The nearest drone is supporting Bravo Company's patrol on Highway 1. We could redirect it, but it would take at least 30 minutes to get it in position over Alpha Company's area of operations. Maria knew that 30 minutes could be an eternity if Alpha Company was in contact with the enemy. She also knew that her supply truck was fueled and ready, and that she knew the area around Alpha Company's last known position from previous supply runs to remote outposts. An idea began to form in her mind, but she knew it was risky and probably against regulations. As she stood there listening to the radio chatter, Maria remembered something her grandfather used to tell her about taking calculated risks. He used to say that sometimes the safe choice was actually the most dangerous choice, especially when other people's lives were at stake. Maria had always been a rule follower, but she also understood that rules were made to be broken when lives were on the line. The radio operator tried again to raise Alpha Company, but there was still no response. Maria could see the worry on the faces of the officers gathered around the radio equipment. They were dealing with incomplete information and limited options, which was every commander's nightmare. They could send another unit to investigate, but that would take time and might put additional soldiers at risk. They could wait and hope that Alpha Company's radio problems were temporary, but that could be a fatal mistake if the Rangers were under attack. Maria made her decision. She walked back to her supply truck and checked her equipment one more time. Her M4 carbine was loaded and ready. Her spare magazines were easily accessible, and her spotting scope was secured in her gear bag. She also grabbed a handheld radio that would allow her to communicate with the base as she got closer to Alpha Company's last known position. Before starting her truck, Maria took a moment to think about what she was about to do. She was a supply coordinator, not a combat soldier. Her job was to stay safe and keep the supplies flowing, not to go charging off into hostile territory looking for missing Rangers. But she also knew that sometimes being a good soldier meant doing things that were not in your job description. Maria started her truck and drove toward the main gate of the base. The guards knew her well from her regular supply runs, so they waved her through without asking too many questions. As she drove through the gate, Maria felt a mixture of fear and determination that reminded her of the first time her grandfather had taken her hunting. She was scared, but she was also ready to do whatever it took to help her fellow soldiers. The road to Alpha Company's area of operations wound through a landscape of brown hills and scattered villages. Maria had driven this route many times before, but never alone and never with the knowledge that American soldiers might be in danger somewhere ahead. She kept her radio on and listened for any transmissions from Alpha Company, but the airwaves remained silent except for routine traffic from other units. As she drove, Maria thought about Captain and his Rangers. They were good soldiers who had families back home waiting for them. They had trusted her to provide them with the supplies they needed, and now they might be in a situation where no amount of supplies could help them. But Maria had skills beyond inventory management and logistics. She had grown up shooting, hunting, and tracking on her grandfather's ranch, and she had maintained those skills even during her military career. About 10 kilometers from the base, Maria reached a checkpoint that marked the boundary between the relatively safe area around the base and the more dangerous territory beyond. The soldiers manning the checkpoint knew her, but they were surprised to see her heading out alone so late in the afternoon. "Santos, what are you doing out here?" asked Sergeant Williams, the checkpoint leader. "I thought all the supply runs were finished for the day." Maria had to make a quick decision about how much to tell him. She did not want to lie to a fellow soldier, but she also did not want to create unnecessary alarm or get stopped by someone who might try to prevent her from continuing her mission. "I'm checking on some equipment that Alpha Company might have left at Outpost Charlie," she said, which was technically true since Outpost Charlie was in the general direction of Alpha Company's last known position. "They might need it picked up." Sergeant Williams nodded and waved her through. As Maria drove away from the checkpoint, she felt the weight of her decision settling on her shoulders. She was now officially in harm's way, driving alone through territory where enemy fighters were known to operate. If something happened to her, it would be her fault for taking unnecessary risks. But if Alpha Company was in trouble and she could help them, the risk would be worth it. The sun was starting to sink toward the western horizon as Maria drove deeper into the wilderness. She knew that she had maybe 3 hours of daylight left, which meant that whatever she was going to accomplish would have to happen quickly. As she drove, she tried to put herself in Captain's position and think about where his team might have run into trouble. According to the map, Alpha Company had been heading toward a small village called, where intelligence reports suggested that insurgent fighters had been stockpiling weapons and explosives. The route to pass through a narrow valley between two, which would be an ideal location for an ambush. Maria had studied enough tactical situations to know that enemy fighters liked to attack in places where their targets had limited options for escape or maneuver. As she approached the area where Alpha Company should have been operating, Maria began to hear the faint sound of gunfire in the distance. The sound was intermittent and seemed to be coming from somewhere ahead of her position. Maria felt her heart rate increase as she realized that her instincts had been correct. Alpha Company was in contact with the enemy, and they were probably fighting for their lives. Maria pulled her truck off the main road and parked it behind a cluster of large rocks that would provide some concealment. She grabbed her rifle, spotting scope, and radio, then climbed up onto the rocks to get a better view of the surrounding terrain. Through her spotting scope, she could see muzzle flashes and smoke rising from a position about 2 kilometers ahead of her. The gunfire was definitely coming from the direction of Alpha Company's target area, and it sounded like a significant firefight was in progress. Maria could distinguish between the sharp crack of American M4 carbines and the deeper sound of AK-47s, which meant that the Rangers were engaged with a substantial enemy force. From the intensity and duration of the gunfire, it was clear that this was not a brief skirmish but a serious battle. Maria keyed her radio and tried to contact the base. "Base, this is Santos. I'm approximately 2 kilometers south of Alpha Company's last known position, and I can hear heavy gunfire from their direction. Alpha Company appears to be in contact with enemy forces." The response came back immediately. "Santos, this is base. What is your current position and status? You are not authorized to leave the base perimeter." Maria knew that she was probably in trouble for going outside the wire without permission, but that was a problem for later. Right now, she needed to focus on helping Alpha Company if she could. "Base, I'm in a covered position with good visibility of the contact area. Alpha Company is definitely engaged with enemy forces, and it sounds like a significant firefight. Do you want me to try to get closer and assess the situation?" There was a long pause before the radio crackled back to life. "Santos, maintain your current position and continue to observe. We are sending a quick reaction force to your location, but they won't arrive for at least 45 minutes. Keep us informed of what you can see." Her spotting scope, Maria could see that Alpha Company had been caught in a classic L-shaped ambush. The Rangers were pinned down in a small depression at the bottom of a valley, while enemy fighters occupied positions on the high ground to their north and east. It was a tactically sound ambush that gave the insurgents overlapping fields of fire and prevented the Americans from using their superior mobility to escape the kill zone. Maria counted at least 12 different muzzle flashes from the enemy positions, which meant that Alpha Company was outnumbered by at least 2 to 1. The Rangers were returning fire, but they were clearly at a disadvantage due to their position in the low ground. Every time one of the Americans tried to move to a better position, enemy fire forced them back into cover. As she watched the firefight develop, Maria began to understand the tactical situation more clearly. The insurgents had chosen their ambush site well. The narrow valley floor provided limited cover for the Rangers, while the rocky slopes above gave the enemy fighters excellent concealment and protection. The Americans were trapped in what military tacticians called a kill zone, and their options for escape were severely limited. Maria could see Captain trying to coordinate his team's response to the ambush. The captain was moving from position to position, directing his Rangers' fire and trying to organize a breakout attempt. But every time the Americans tried to advance up the slopes, withering enemy fire forced them back into the depression. The sound of gunfire was almost constant now, punctuated by the occasional explosion of a hand grenade or improvised explosive device. Maria could see dirt and rock chips flying as bullets impacted around the Rangers' positions. It was clear that Alpha Company was fighting for their lives, and time was not on their side. Maria keyed her radio again. "Base, Alpha Company is pinned down in an L-shaped ambush. I count at least 12 enemy positions on the high ground north and east of the Rangers' position. The Americans are in a depression with limited cover, and enemy fire is preventing them from maneuvering out of the kill zone." "Copy, Santos. Can you determine Alpha Company's casualties or ammunition status?" Maria adjusted her spotting scope and tried to get a better view of the Rangers' positions. It was difficult to see individual soldiers from her distance, but she could tell that the Americans were conserving their ammunition and firing in controlled bursts rather than going to full automatic. That suggested they were concerned about running low on ammunition, which was not a good sign in a prolonged firefight. "Base, Alpha Company appears to be conserving ammunition. I can see them firing in controlled bursts, which suggests they may be running low on supplies. No visible casualties from my position, but I can't get a clear count of personnel." As Maria continued to observe the battle, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Enemy fighters were moving along to the west, apparently trying to cut off Alpha Company's escape route back toward the base. If the insurgents succeeded in closing that gap, the Rangers would be completely surrounded with no chance of escape. "Base, I've got enemy movement on the western. Looks like they're trying to cut off Alpha Company's escape route. If they succeed, the Rangers will be completely surrounded." The gravity of the situation was becoming clear to everyone involved. Alpha Company was outnumbered and in danger of being completely cut off from any possibility of rescue. The quick reaction force was still more than 30 minutes away, and a lot could happen in 30 minutes. Maria made a decision that would define the rest of her military career. She could continue to observe and report, which was what she had been ordered to do. Or she could take action to help the Rangers, even though it meant disobeying orders and putting herself in extreme danger. It was not really a choice at all. "Base, I'm going to try to get closer and provide assistance to Alpha Company." "Negative, Santos. You are ordered to maintain your current position and continue to observe. Do not approach the contact area." Maria understood the order, but she also understood that following it might mean watching Alpha Company get wiped out. She had not joined the army to stand by and watch fellow soldiers die when she might be able to help them. Her grandfather had taught her that there were times when doing the right thing meant breaking the rules. "Base, I understand your order, but I'm in a position to provide assistance that could save American lives. I'm going to proceed." Maria turned off her radio before anyone could respond. She knew that she was probably ending her military career, but some things were more important than career advancement. She gathered her equipment and began working her way closer to the battle. Moving through the rocky terrain required all of the skills that Maria had learned growing up on her grandfather's ranch. She used every bit of available cover, moved slowly to avoid creating dust or noise, and constantly scanned the area ahead for signs of enemy activity. The sound of gunfire grew louder as she got closer, and she could now hear the individual voices of rangers calling out target information and ammunition requests. After 20 minutes of careful movement, Maria reached a position on the southern slope of the valley that gave her a clear view of both the Rangers' positions and most of the enemy ambush sites. She was now close enough to make accurate shots with her M4 carbine, and more importantly, she had an angle of fire that the enemy had not anticipated. The insurgents had positioned themselves to watch the valley floor and the slopes to the north and east, but they had not established security to the south. Maria's new position put her behind and slightly above several of the enemy fighting positions, which gave her a significant tactical advantage. Maria set up her rifle on a stable rest and began to study the enemy positions through her rifle scope. She could see individual fighters moving between rocks and firing at the Rangers below. Most of the insurgents were focused on the battle and not paying attention to potential threats from other directions. Before taking any action, Maria tried one more time to contact Alpha Company directly on their tactical frequency. "Alpha 6, this is Santos. I'm in an overwatch position south of your location with eyes on multiple enemy positions. Do you copy?" The response came back immediately, and Maria could hear the relief in Captain's voice. "Santos, thank God, we're pinned down hard and running low on ammunition. We've got wounded and can't break contact. Can you provide fire support?" "Affirmative, Alpha 6. I count 12 enemy positions on the high ground. I'm going to start engaging targets from the south. When you hear my fire, be ready to move wounded personnel to better cover." Maria took a deep breath and selected her first target. It was an insurgent fighter who was positioned behind a large rock about 400 meters away. The fighter was firing an AK-47 down at the Rangers and was completely exposed from Maria's position. She had made similar shots hundreds of times on her grandfather's ranch, but this was the first time she would be shooting at another human being. Maria controlled her breathing and squeezed the trigger slowly and steadily. The shot broke cleanly, and through her scope, she saw the insurgent fighter drop behind the rock. She did not know if she had killed him or just wounded him, but he was no longer shooting at Alpha Company. The other enemy fighters had not yet realized where the shot had come from, which gave Maria time to select her second target. This time it was a fighter with an RPG launcher who was trying to get into position to fire at the Rangers. Maria's shot took him down before he could get his weapon into action. Now the insurgents were beginning to realize that they were taking fire from a new direction. Several fighters turned to scan the southern slopes, but Maria had chosen her position well. She was concealed among the rocks and difficult to spot, especially for fighters who were under pressure from multiple directions. Maria continued to engage targets systematically, taking carefully aimed shots at insurgents who were in positions to threaten Alpha Company. Her years of hunting experience served her well, as she prioritized targets based on the immediate threat they posed to the Rangers. Fighters with automatic weapons and RPGs got priority, followed by those who were in positions to direct fire on wounded Rangers. With each shot, the pressure on Alpha Company decreased slightly. The insurgents were forced to divide their attention between the Rangers in the valley and this new threat from the south. Some fighters began to reposition themselves to deal with Maria, which further reduced the effective fire on the Rangers' positions. Captain recognized the opportunity that Maria's intervention had created. All Alpha elements, prepare to move wounded personnel to the rocks on the north side of the depression. Santos is keeping the enemy's heads down, so we need to take advantage of this opportunity. Maria could see Rangers moving through her rifle scope, carrying wounded teammates to better cover. She shifted her fire to cover their movement, engaging any insurgent who tried to interfere with the evacuation of wounded personnel. Her shots were precise and deadly, each one eliminating a specific threat to the Rangers below. As the battle continued, Maria found herself in a strange state of focused calm. Her grandfather had always told her that good shooters could slow down time and make every shot count when it really mattered. That was exactly what was happening now. Everything seemed to move in slow motion as Maria selected targets, aimed carefully, and squeezed off shot after shot. The insurgents were beginning to panic as their carefully planned ambush fell apart. They had expected to trap and destroy an isolated American patrol, but now they found themselves being picked off by an unknown sniper from an unexpected direction. Several fighters began to withdraw from their positions, which further reduced the pressure on Alpha Company. Alpha 6, this is Santos. I count 8 enemy fighters down, and several others appear to be withdrawing from their positions. You should have a window to consolidate your position and treat your wounded. Outstanding work, Santos. We've got 3 wounded but no killed in action. We're moving to a more defensible position while you continue to engage the enemy. Maria could see the Rangers moving to a cluster of large boulders that provided better cover from the remaining enemy positions. The movement was covered by disciplined rifle fire from the Rangers who were not moving, and Maria continued to engage any insurgents who tried to interfere with the tactical movement. As Alpha Company reached their new position, Maria took stock of the tactical situation. She had eliminated or driven off most of the insurgents from the eastern slope, and the fighters on the northern ridge were beginning to withdraw under pressure from renewed Ranger fire. The immediate threat to Alpha Company had been significantly reduced, but the battle was not over yet. Base, this is Santos. Alpha Company has broken contact with the main enemy force and moved to a more defensible position. Enemy forces appear to be withdrawing, but we still have several fighters in the area. Maria had turned her radio back on and was not surprised to hear an immediate response from the base operations center. Santos, you were ordered to maintain your observation position. What is your current status? Base, I'm in an overwatch position providing fire support to Alpha Company. I have engaged and eliminated multiple enemy targets, and Alpha Company is now able to treat their wounded and prepare for extraction. There was a long pause before the radio crackled back to life. Santos, the quick reaction force is 10 minutes from your position. Can you maintain overwatch until they arrive? Affirmative, Base. I have good visibility of the area and sufficient ammunition to continue providing cover for Alpha Company. As Maria waited for the cavalry to arrive, she continued to scan the surrounding terrain for signs of enemy activity. The remaining insurgents seemed to be withdrawing toward the north, probably hopping to escape before American reinforcements arrived. A few fighters were still shooting sporadically at Alpha Company's new position, but their fire was ineffective against the improved cover. Maria noticed movement on the western ridge that concerned her. A group of insurgents was trying to work their way around to a position where they could fire down on Alpha Company's new location. If they succeeded, the Rangers would once again be in serious danger. Alpha 6, I've got enemy movement on the western ridge. Looks like they're trying to get into position to fire down on your new location from the west. Copy, Santos. We're pretty well dug in here, but we can't cover all approaches. Can you engage those targets? The range to the western ridge was about 600 meters, which was at the edge of Maria's effective range with her M4 carbine. But she had been making long shots since she was a teenager, and she knew her weapons' capabilities better than most soldiers. More importantly, she knew that Alpha Company was depending on her to keep those insurgents from getting into an effective firing position. Maria adjusted her aim to compensate for the longer range and began engaging the insurgents on the western ridge. At 600 meters, she had to aim higher to account for bullet drop, and the targets were smaller and harder to hit. But her first shot connected with an insurgent who was trying to set up a machine gun position, and her second shot scattered the rest of the group. The insurgents on the western ridge decided that discretion was the better part of valor and began to withdraw rapidly toward the north. Maria continued to take long-range shots at them as they moved, more to discourage them from returning than with any expectation of hitting targets at that extreme range. Alpha 6, enemy forces on the western ridge are withdrawing. Your position should be secure for the time being. Outstanding, Santos. I don't know how to thank you for what you've done today. You saved our bacon when we thought we were going to end up as casualties. Before Maria could respond, she heard the distinctive sound of helicopters approaching from the south. The quick reaction force was finally arriving, carried by us 60 Black Hawk helicopters that would quickly tip the balance in favor of the Americans. Within minutes, the helicopters would be inserting fresh troops who could pursue the fleeing insurgents and secure the area around Alpha Company's position. Maria continued to provide overwatch as the helicopters landed and disgorged their loads of heavily armed Rangers. The new arrivals immediately began to establish a security perimeter around Alpha Company's position, while medics worked on the wounded Rangers. The tactical situation had shifted completely in favor of the Americans, and the immediate danger was over. Santos, this is the Quick Reaction Force commander. We're on the ground and have secured the area. You can cease fire and report to my location for debriefing. Maria carefully her weapon and began the long climb down from her firing position. As she worked her way back toward the valley floor, she could hear helicopters approaching to evacuate Alpha Company's wounded and extract the entire force back to base. The mission that had started as a routine reconnaissance patrol had turned into a significant engagement. But thanks to Maria's intervention, all of the Rangers were going home alive. As she reached the valley floor, Maria was met by Captain and several of his Rangers. The captain had a huge grin on his face as he walked toward her with his hand extended. The helicopter ride back to forward operating base Kestrel was unlike anything Maria had ever experienced. She sat across from 3 wounded Rangers who owed their lives to her marksmanship, while Captain briefed the Quick Reaction Force commander on what had happened during the ambush. The Rangers kept looking at her with expressions of amazement and gratitude that made Maria uncomfortable. She had done what needed to be done, but she did not feel like a hero. As the Black Hawk approached the base, Maria could see vehicles and personnel gathering at the landing zone. Word had already spread about what had happened in the valley, and it seemed like half the base was turning out to see the woman who had single-handedly broken up an insurgent ambush. Maria wished she could just slip away quietly and return to her normal duties, but she knew that her life had changed forever during those crucial minutes on the hillside. The helicopter touched down with a gentle bump, and medics immediately rushed forward to help evacuate the wounded Rangers. Maria watched as the injured soldiers were loaded onto stretchers and rushed toward the base hospital. Their wounds were serious but not life-threatening, which meant that all of Alpha Company would eventually return home to their families. That knowledge made everything else worthwhile. As Maria stepped off the helicopter, she was surprised to see Lieutenant Colonel, the base commander, waiting for her at the edge of the landing zone. Colonel was a career infantry officer who had served multiple combat tours, and his presence meant that Maria's unauthorized departure from base had reached the highest levels of command. She was probably about to face the worst disciplinary action of her military career. Staff Sergeant Santos, report to my office immediately for debriefing, Colonel said, but his tone was not angry. Instead, he sounded curious and perhaps even impressed. Captain has provided an initial report of your actions today, and I need to hear your version of events. Maria followed the colonel across the base toward the headquarters building, aware that dozens of soldiers were watching her every step. She could hear whispered conversations and see pointing fingers as word of her actions spread throughout the base. By tomorrow, every soldier at Forward Operating Base Kestrel would know the story of the supply coordinator who had saved Alpha Company. Colonel's office was furnished with military-issue furniture and maps of the surrounding area. The colonel gestured for Maria to take a seat while he settled behind his desk and opened a notebook. Maria noticed that Captain was also in the room, along with the intelligence officer who had been coordinating the search for Alpha Company. "Staff Sergeant Santos," Colonel began, "you violated direct orders by leaving the base perimeter without authorization. You placed yourself in extreme danger and could have compromised the Quick Reaction Force mission by requiring them to rescue you as well as Alpha Company. Do you understand the gravity of your actions?" Maria nodded. "Yes, sir. I understand that I violated regulations and my chain of command. I take full responsibility for my actions." "Good. Now that we've established that you completely disregarded proper military procedures, I want you to explain why you felt justified in taking those actions." Maria took a moment to collect her thoughts before responding. She knew that her answer would determine whether she faced disciplinary action or commendation, but more importantly, she wanted to explain her motivations honestly. "Sir, I could hear the firefight from my observation position, and it was clear that Alpha Company was in serious trouble. The Quick Reaction Force was still 45 minutes away, and a lot can happen in 45 minutes during a firefight. I had the skills and equipment to provide immediate assistance, and I believed that following orders to stay in my observation position would result in unnecessary American casualties." Colonel made notes in his book as Maria spoke. "Tell me about your shooting background, Staff Sergeant. Captain says you made 11 confirmed kills at ranges up to 600 meters with standard infantry equipment. That's remarkable shooting under combat conditions." "Sir, I grew up on a ranch in Texas, and my grandfather taught me to shoot when I was 8 years old. I've been hunting and target shooting for most of my life, and I've maintained those skills even during my military service. The shots I made today were well within my capabilities, especially given the tactical advantages of my firing position." Captain leaned forward in his chair. "Sir, if I may add something to Staff Sergeant Santos's account. When she contacted us on the tactical frequency, my Rangers were running critically low on ammunition, and we had 3 wounded soldiers who needed immediate medical attention. We were pinned down in an indefensible position, and the enemy was maneuvering to cut off our escape routes. Without Santos's intervention, Alpha Company would have suffered significant casualties, possibly including killed in action." The intelligence officer consulted his notes and spoke for the first time since Maria had entered the room. "Sir, we've analyzed the enemy positions based on Staff Sergeant Santos's reports and the physical evidence from the battlefield. The insurgents had established a complex ambush that demonstrated significant tactical planning and preparation. They positioned fighters to create overlapping fields of fire and established blocking positions to prevent Alpha Company from escaping the kill zone. It was a textbook L-shaped ambush executed by experienced fighters." The colonel looked up from his notes and studied Maria's face. "Staff Sergeant, You mentioned that you made 11 confirmed kills. How certain are you of that number? Sir, I engaged 11 different targets and observed each one drop out of action after being hit. I cannot confirm whether all of those individuals were killed or merely wounded, but they all stopped participating in the firefight immediately after being engaged. The Quick Reaction Force found 8 dead insurgents at the positions you targeted, the intelligence officer added. 3 others appear to have been wounded, but were evacuated by their comrades during the withdrawal. All 11 positions that you engaged were abandoned by the time our forces reached them. Colonel made more notes and then closed his notebook. Staff Sergeant Santos, your actions today present me with a significant command decision. On one hand, you clearly violated orders and military regulations by leaving the base perimeter without authorization. On the other hand, your actions directly saved the lives of American soldiers and prevented what could have been a catastrophic loss for Alpha Company. Maria waited for the colonel to continue, knowing that her military career hung in the balance. She had done what she believed was right, but the military had rules for good reasons, and individual soldiers could not be allowed to ignore orders whenever they disagreed with them. I'm recommending you for the Silver Star for gallantry in action against an armed enemy, Colonel said, surprising everyone in the room. Your actions demonstrated exceptional courage and tactical skill under extremely dangerous conditions. However, I'm also placing a letter of counseling in your personnel file for failure to follow direct orders. In the future, you will coordinate any tactical movements with this headquarters before departing the base perimeter. Maria felt a wave of relief wash over her. The Silver Star was one of the military's highest decorations for valor, and receiving it would mark her as a genuine war hero. The letter of counseling was a relatively minor disciplinary action that would not seriously damage her career prospects. Thank you, sir, Maria said. I understand the importance of following proper procedures, and I'll make sure to coordinate any future actions with headquarters. There's one more thing, Staff Sergeant, Colonel continued. Based on today's events, I'm reassigning you to a new position. You're now the base marksmanship instructor, responsible for training all personnel in advanced rifle techniques. Your supply coordinator duties will be transferred to someone else. Maria was stunned by the sudden career change. She had been a supply coordinator for 3 tours and had never considered becoming a marksmanship instructor. But she understood that her actions had demonstrated capabilities that the military wanted to utilize in a different capacity. Sir, I appreciate the confidence you're showing in me, but I don't have any formal training as a marksmanship instructor. I'm just a farm girl who learned to shoot from her grandfather. Captain smiled. Santos, I've seen Special Forces snipers who couldn't have made the shots you made today under those conditions. Whatever your grandfather taught you about shooting, it's exactly what our soldiers need to learn. Over the next several days, Maria found herself adjusting to a completely new role at Forward Operating Base Kestrel. The soldiers who had previously known her as the friendly supply coordinator who could find anything they needed now looked at her with a mixture of respect and awe. Word of her actions had spread throughout the military community, and she was receiving congratulatory messages from soldiers at bases across Afghanistan. The transition to marksmanship instructor was more challenging than Maria had expected. She had spent years perfecting her own shooting skills, but teaching those skills to others required a completely different set of abilities. She had to break down complex actions into simple steps that could be understood and practiced by soldiers with varying levels of shooting experience. Maria started by developing a curriculum that covered the fundamentals of marksmanship: proper shooting positions, breathing techniques, sight alignment, trigger control, and range estimation. She incorporated lessons that her grandfather had taught her about reading wind conditions and adjusting for different lighting situations. Most importantly, she emphasized the mental aspects of shooting that separated good marksmen from average ones. The first group of students to go through Maria's marksmanship course was a squad of Rangers from Bravo Company. These were experienced combat soldiers who already knew how to shoot, but they wanted to learn the advanced techniques that had made Maria so effective during the Alpha Company rescue. "The most important thing my grandfather taught me," Maria told the Rangers during their first class, "is that shooting is 90% mental and 10% physical. You can have perfect technique, but if your mind is not focused and calm, you'll miss the target every time." Maria set up a shooting range at the edge of the base, where she could teach soldiers to engage targets at various ranges under different conditions. She started with basic marksmanship principles and gradually worked up to more advanced techniques like shooting from improvised positions and engaging moving targets. The Rangers were impressed by Maria's teaching methods, which emphasized practical applications over theoretical knowledge. She taught them how to use available terrain to steady their shots, how to estimate range without sophisticated equipment, and how to quickly identify and prioritize multiple targets. "Santos, this is completely different from any marksmanship training I've received," said Sergeant Martinez, a squad leader with 8 years of military experience. "You're teaching us things that aren't in any Army manual, but they make perfect sense when you explain them." Maria smiled. "My grandfather used to say that books can teach you the rules of shooting, but only experience can teach you when to break those rules. Every shooting situation is different, and you have to adapt your techniques to the specific conditions you're facing." As word of Maria's teaching abilities spread, requests for marksmanship training began pouring in from other units at the base. Intelligence analysts wanted to learn long-range observation techniques. Military police wanted to improve their accuracy with pistols and carbines. Even support personnel like cooks and mechanics requested basic marksmanship training to improve their defensive capabilities. Colonels supported Maria's expanding training program and provided her with additional resources and assistant instructors. He recognized that improved marksmanship skills would enhance the combat effectiveness of every soldier at the base, regardless of their primary military occupation. 1 month after the Alpha Company rescue, Maria received news that would change her life once again. She was being transferred to the United States Army Marksmanship Unit at Fort Benning, Georgia, where she would receive formal training as a marksmanship instructor and help develop new training programs for soldiers throughout the Army. The assignment to Fort Benning was a significant career opportunity that would allow Maria to influence marksmanship training on a much larger scale. It was also recognition that her unique combination of natural shooting ability and teaching skills made her a valuable asset to the military. Captain was among the officers who came to see Maria off when her transfer orders came through. "Santos, you've changed the way everyone on this base thinks about marksmanship and about what support personnel can accomplish in combat situations. You've shown that heroism can come from the most unexpected places." As Maria packed her personal equipment for the flight back to the United States, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that afternoon when she heard gunfire in the distance and decided to investigate. She had started as a supply coordinator whose job was to stay safe and keep other soldiers equipped for combat. She was ending her deployment as a decorated war hero whose actions had saved 11 lives and whose teaching would influence thousands of future soldiers. The helicopter that carried Maria away from Forward Operating Base Kestrel passed over the valley where Alpha Company had been ambushed 6 weeks earlier. From the air, she could see the rocky slopes where she had made the shots that defined her military career. The area looked peaceful and empty, but Maria knew that the events that had occurred there would be remembered for years to come. As the helicopter banked toward the main airfield where Maria would catch her flight home, she thought about her grandfather and the lessons he had taught her about shooting, courage, and doing the right thing even when it was difficult. He had always told her that the most important shots in life were the ones you took when everything was on the line and other people were counting on you to succeed. Maria had faced that test and passed it with flying colors. Now she was heading home to begin a new chapter of her military career, one that would allow her to pass on her grandfather's wisdom to a new generation of American soldiers. The girl who had learned to shoot cans off fence posts in Texas was about to become one of the Army's premier marksmanship instructors, and her influence would be felt on battlefields around the world. But Maria knew that her greatest achievement would always be those 11 shot the United States Army Marksmanship Unit at Fort Benning was a world away from the dusty supply depot where Maria had spent most of her military career. The facilities were state-of-the-art, with indoor and outdoor shooting ranges, ballistics laboratories, and classrooms equipped with the latest training technology. Maria felt somewhat overwhelmed as she reported for her first day of formal instructor training. Master Sergeant Williams, the chief instructor at the Marksmanship Unit, was a career soldier with more than 20 years of experience in various combat specialties. He had heard about Maria's actions in Afghanistan and was curious to meet the supply coordinator who had become an overnight shooting legend. "Staff Sergeant Santos, welcome to the home of Army marksmanship," Williams said as he showed Maria around the facility. "I've read your after-action reports from Afghanistan, and I have to say that your performance under combat conditions was exceptional. What we need to determine now is whether you can translate those instinctive shooting skills into a systematic training program that can be taught to thousands of soldiers." The challenge that Master Sergeant Williams presented was exactly what Maria had been thinking about during her flight from Afghanistan. Her grandfather had taught her to shoot through years of patient instruction and countless hours of practice. But the Army needed training programs that could quickly and efficiently improve the marksmanship skills of soldiers who might only have a few weeks to master advanced techniques. Maria's first assignment at Fort Benning was to work with a team of instructors to analyze her shooting techniques and develop standardized training methods that could be replicated by other instructors. This meant breaking down everything she did instinctively into specific steps that could be taught and practiced. The process was more difficult than Maria had expected. When she aimed at a target, she unconsciously considered dozens of factors: wind direction and velocity, lighting conditions, target movement, range estimation, and the specific characteristics of her weapon and ammunition. All of these calculations happened in a fraction of a second, but teaching others to make the same calculations required her to consciously analyze each step. Dr. Sarah, a ballistics expert assigned to the marksmanship unit, helped Maria understand the scientific principles behind her shooting success. Using high-speed cameras and computer analysis, Doctor was able to measure exactly how Maria positioned her body, controlled her breathing, and timed her shots. "What's remarkable about your shooting technique?" Doctor explained as they reviewed slow-motion video of Maria firing at targets, "is how consistently you achieve optimal conditions for each shot. Your body position minimizes movement, your breathing pattern maximizes oxygen flow to your brain, and your trigger control eliminates any disturbance to your aim. Most shooters achieve these conditions occasionally, but you achieve them every time." The scientific analysis helped Maria understand why her grandfather's teaching methods had been so effective. Every technique he had taught her was designed to maximize accuracy and consistency, even though he had never explained the underlying scientific principles. He had simply observed what worked and developed training methods that produced results. Working with Doctor and the other instructors at Fort Benning, Maria began to develop a comprehensive training program that combined her grandfather's practical wisdom with modern understanding of ballistics and human performance. The program emphasized fundamentals, but also taught advanced techniques for engaging targets under challenging conditions. 3 months into her assignment at Fort Benning, Maria received an unexpected visit from Captain, who was back in the United States for medical treatment of injuries he had sustained in a later deployment. The captain had heard about Maria's new assignment and wanted to see how her teaching program was developing. "Santos, I can't tell you how proud I am of what you're accomplishing here," Captain said, as he watched Maria instruct a class of new Army recruits. "Every soldier who goes through your training program will be better prepared for combat because of what you learned in Afghanistan." The reunion with Captain reminded Maria of why her work at Fort Benning was so important. The techniques she was teaching would eventually be used by soldiers in combat situations where accuracy and speed could mean the difference between life and death. Every improvement she made to the training program could potentially save American lives on future battlefields. Maria's teaching methods were revolutionary in their emphasis on practical application over theoretical knowledge. Instead of spending hours in classrooms learning about ballistics formulas, her students spent most of their time on shooting ranges learning to apply fundamental principles under varying conditions. The most important thing you can learn as a marksman, Maria told each new class, is to trust your training and remain calm under pressure. When bullets are flying and your fellow soldiers are depending on you, you won't have time to remember complex formulas or consult reference manuals. You'll only have time to apply the fundamentals that have become second nature through practice. Maria's training program included scenarios that simulated combat conditions as closely as possible. Students learned to engage targets while wearing full combat equipment, shoot from improvised positions, and make rapid decisions about target priority. They practiced shooting in low light conditions, during simulated artillery bombardments, and while under time pressure. The realism of Maria's training scenarios was based directly on her combat experience in Afghanistan. She remembered how different it had felt to shoot at human targets compared to paper targets on a peaceful shooting range. She understood the psychological pressure that soldiers faced when lives were at stake, and she designed her training to prepare students for those mental challenges. 6 months after arriving at Fort Benning, Maria's training program was selected for implementation throughout the Army. The program, officially designated as the Advanced Combat Marksmanship Course, would become mandatory for all infantry soldiers and optional for personnel in other military occupations. The success of Maria's training program led to new opportunities and responsibilities. She was promoted to Sergeant First Class and assigned to lead a team of instructors who would travel to Army bases around the world to implement the Advanced Combat Marksmanship course. It was a position that would allow her to influence military training on a global scale. Maria's first overseas assignment as a senior marksmanship instructor was to a forward operating base in Iraq, where she would train soldiers who were preparing for deployment to combat zones. The irony was not lost on her that she was returning to a combat environment as a highly sought-after instructor, when just a year earlier she had been a supply coordinator whose shooting skills were unknown to the military establishment. The base in Iraq was similar to forward operating base Kestrel in many ways, but Maria's role there was completely different. Instead of managing supply inventories and fielding equipment requests, she was responsible for improving the combat capabilities of hundreds of soldiers. The transformation in her military career was remarkable, but she never forgot the lessons she had learned as a supply coordinator. Every soldier has hidden talents and capabilities that might not be apparent from their assigned duties, Maria told the officers who attended her instructor development courses. One of the most important things we can do as leaders is to create opportunities for soldiers to demonstrate abilities that extend beyond their primary military occupation. Maria's philosophy of leadership was shaped by her own experience of being underestimated and overlooked. She remembered how it felt to be seen as just a supply coordinator, and she was determined to help other soldiers avoid similar limitations on their potential contributions to military operations. During her assignment in Iraq, Maria encountered a young soldier named Private Johnson, who was struggling with basic marksmanship requirements. Johnson was assigned to a transportation unit and had limited combat training, but he was required to qualify with his personal weapon as a condition of his deployment. Most instructors would have focused on getting Johnson to barely meet minimum standards so he could complete his qualification requirements. But Maria recognized something in the young soldier's attitude and determination that reminded her of herself. She decided to invest extra time and effort in helping him develop his shooting skills. "Private Johnson, I want you to understand that marksmanship is not just about hitting targets," Maria told him during one of their individual training sessions. "It's about developing confidence, discipline, and attention to detail. These are qualities that will serve you well in any military occupation, not just combat roles." Under Maria's patient instruction, Private Johnson gradually improved from barely qualifying with his weapon to becoming one of the best shooters in his transportation unit. More importantly, the confidence he gained through marksmanship training carried over into other aspects of his military service. 6 months later, Private Johnson's transportation convoy was ambushed while delivering supplies to a remote outpost. During the attack, Johnson used the shooting skills that Maria had taught him to engage insurgent fighters and help his convoy escape without casualties. His unit commander credited Johnson's accurate return fire with preventing what could have been a catastrophic loss of personnel and equipment. When Maria learned about Private Johnson's combat performance, she felt the same sense of satisfaction that she had experienced after saving Alpha Company in Afghanistan. The knowledge that her training had directly contributed to saving American lives validated everything she was trying to accomplish as a marksmanship instructor. The success stories like Private Johnson's helped establish Maria's reputation as one of the Army's premier marksmanship instructors. Officers from Special Forces units began requesting her training for their most elite soldiers, and foreign military organizations invited her to share her techniques with their personnel. Maria's growing reputation led to an assignment that would define the next phase of her military career. She was selected to establish a new advanced marksmanship training center at Fort Hood, Texas, that would serve as the Army's primary facility for developing shooting instructors and testing new training techniques. The assignment to Fort Hood meant returning to her home state of Texas, where her military journey had begun so many years earlier. It also meant taking on the significant responsibility of creating an entirely new training institution from the ground up. "Sergeant First Class Santos," Colonel told her during a visit to Iraq, "you've proven that exceptional marksmanship skills can emerge from unexpected places and have extraordinary impact on military operations. Now we want you to institutionalize that knowledge and create a training system that will benefit the Army for generations to come." The challenge of establishing the Advanced Marksmanship Training Center at Fort Hood was unlike anything Maria had faced in her military career. She had to design curricula, select and train instructor personnel, procure equipment, and establish operating procedures for a facility that would eventually train thousands of soldiers annually. Maria approached the challenge with the same systematic thinking that had made her an effective supply coordinator. She analyzed the training requirements, identified the necessary resources, and developed implementation timelines that would allow the center to become operational within 18 months. The most important decision Maria made during the planning phase was to recruit instructor personnel from diverse military backgrounds, rather than limiting the staff to traditional marksmanship specialists. She wanted instructors who understood the full range of military operations and could relate shooting skills to the specific challenges faced by soldiers in different roles. "We're not trying to train competition shooters or military snipers," Maria explained to the instructor candidates during their orientation. "We're trying to improve the combat effectiveness of every soldier in the Army by teaching them to use their weapons more accurately and confidently. That requires instructors who understand how marksmanship fits into the broader context of military operations." Maria's approach to instructor selection was influenced by her own experience of being overlooked because of her assignment as a supply coordinator. She was determined to create an environment where capability and potential were more important than previous military occupation or traditional credentials. The instructor team that Maria assembled included former infantry soldiers, military police, artillery personnel, aviation mechanics, and even a few supply coordinators who had demonstrated exceptional shooting ability. What they all had in common was a commitment to teaching and the ability to communicate complex skills in ways that students could understand and apply. As the Advanced Marksmanship Training Center neared completion, Maria reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her from managing supply inventories in Afghanistan to establishing one of the Army's premier training institutions. The transformation had begun with 11 shots fired from a hillside overlooking a valley where American soldiers were fighting for their lives. Everything that had happened since then was a consequence of those crucial minutes when Maria had to choose between following orders and taking action to save lives. The decision to leave her observation position and engage enemy fighters had not only saved Alpha Company, but had also revealed capabilities that changed the course of her entire military career. As she prepared for the grand opening of the Advanced Marksmanship Training Center, Maria knew that her greatest contribution to military service was still ahead of her. The center would train thousands of instructors who would then teach marksmanship skills to hundreds of thousands of soldiers around the world. Her influence on military training would eventually be felt in every corner of the Army. But Maria also knew that she would never forget the lessons she had learned as a supply coordinator about the importance of supporting other soldiers and being ready to help when help was needed. 3 years after establishing the Advanced Marksmanship Training Center at Fort Hood, Master Sergeant Maria Santos stood before an audience of military leaders from 30 different countries at the International Military Training Conference in Germany. She was delivering the keynote address on innovative approaches to combat marksmanship, a topic that had become her specialty and passion. The journey from supply coordinator to internationally recognized expert had been remarkable, but Maria never forgot the lessons that had shaped her character. Every speech, every training session, and every interaction with young soldiers was guided by the principles her grandfather had taught her about competence, humility, and service to others. Ladies and, Maria began her address. 3.5 years ago, I was managing inventory in a supply depot in Afghanistan. My job was to count ammunition, not to use it in combat. But military service has taught me that we must all be prepared to exceed our assigned roles when circumstances demand it, and that exceptional performance often emerges from unexpected places. The audience of colonels, generals, and defense ministers listened intently as Maria recounted the events that had transformed her from a logistics specialist into one of the military's premier marksmanship authorities. She emphasized the importance of recognizing and developing hidden talents among military personnel, regardless of their official job descriptions. The Advanced Marksmanship Training Center had become a model for military training institutions around the world. In its first 3 years of operation, the center had trained more than 2,000 marksmanship instructors who had returned to their units to implement Maria's teaching methods. The impact of these instructors was being felt on battlefields around the globe, where improved marksmanship was saving lives and increasing mission success rates. Maria's influence extended beyond just shooting techniques. Her emphasis on building confidence, maintaining composure under pressure, and adapting to changing conditions had applications throughout military training. Officers from various specialties visited Fort Hood to study her methods and adapt them to their own training programs. The success of the training center had led to Maria's promotion to Master Sergeant, making her one of the youngest soldiers to achieve that rank in the logistics field. More importantly, her promotion had been based on her performance as a trainer and leader rather than her original specialty, proving that the Army was willing to recognize and reward excellence regardless of traditional career paths. But Maria's greatest satisfaction came from the letters and reports she received from soldiers who had been trained by her instructors. Stories of lives saved, missions accomplished, and confidence built through improved marksmanship validated everything she had worked to achieve since that day in Afghanistan. One particularly meaningful letter came from Sergeant Williams, a former student of Private Johnson who had been inspired by his mentor's transformation under Maria's instruction. Williams had become a marksmanship instructor himself and was now training soldiers at a forward operating base in Africa. Master Sergeant Santos, Williams wrote, I wanted you to know that the techniques your instructors taught me have already paid dividends in combat. Last month, my unit was conducting a patrol when we were engaged by insurgent fighters. Using the shooting principles I learned at Fort Hood, I was able to engage multiple targets at extended range and help my squad break contact without casualties. The confidence I gained through your training program made all the difference when it really counted. Letters like William's reminded Maria why her work was so important. Every student who passed through the Advanced Marksmanship Training Center represented dozens or hundreds of soldiers whose lives might be saved by improved shooting skills and increased confidence in combat situations. The international recognition of Maria's training methods had led to opportunities to work with foreign military organizations and share American marksmanship expertise with allied nations. She had conducted training programs in Europe, Asia, and Africa, always adapting her techniques to local conditions and cultural considerations. During a training mission to Jordan, Maria worked with soldiers who were defending their country against extremist organizations operating in the region. The Jordanian military had requested assistance in improving their soldiers' accuracy and effectiveness in urban combat situations. Master Sergeant Santos, Colonel Allah of the Jordanian army told her, "Our soldiers are brave and dedicated, but they need better shooting skills to be effective against enemies who often have superior numbers and equipment. We hope that your training methods can help level the playing field." Maria spent 6 weeks in Jordan, working with local instructors to adapt her teaching methods to the specific challenges faced by Jordanian soldiers. The training emphasized quick target acquisition, shooting from urban positions, and maintaining accuracy under stress. By the end of the program, the Jordanian instructors were ready to implement the training throughout their military. The success of the Jordan mission led to similar requests from other allied nations. Maria found herself traveling the world as an unofficial ambassador for American military training methods, sharing expertise while learning about different approaches to soldier development. Each international assignment taught Maria something new about the universal challenges faced by military forces. Soldiers everywhere struggled with the same basic issues: building confidence, maintaining skills under pressure, and adapting to changing tactical situations. Her training methods proved effective across different cultures and military traditions because they addressed fundamental human factors rather than just technical skills. The global scope of Maria's influence was demonstrated during a ceremony at the Pentagon, where she received the Legion of Merit for her contributions to military training and readiness. The citation recognized her role in developing training methods that had improved the combat effectiveness of American and Allied forces around the world. During the ceremony, Maria was surprised to see many familiar faces in the audience. Captain, now a lieutenant colonel, had flown in from his current assignment to attend the ceremony. Several of the Rangers from Alpha Company were present, along with instructors from the Fort Hood Training Center and students who had gone on to distinguished military careers. "Master Sergeant Santos," General said during his presentation remarks, "has demonstrated that military excellence can emerge from any background and any military occupation. Her transformation from supply coordinator to internationally recognized expert proves that the Army's greatest strength is its ability to identify and develop talent wherever it exists." As Maria stood at attention during the ceremony, she thought about her grandfather and the values he had instilled in her. His emphasis on competence, service, and doing the right thing had guided every decision she had made since that day in Afghanistan when she heard gunfire and chose to act. After the ceremony, Maria had an opportunity to speak privately with the Rangers from Alpha Company who had attended the event. These were the soldiers whose lives she had saved with 11 carefully aimed shots, and their presence at the ceremony was a reminder of why her subsequent career had been so meaningful. "Master Sergeant," said Sergeant, who had been one of the wounded Rangers evacuated from the valley, "I wanted to thank you again for what you did that day. But I also wanted to thank you for everything you've done since then. My younger brother just completed the Advanced Combat Marksmanship course before deploying to Syria, and he credits that training with saving his life during a firefight last month." The connection between her actions in Afghanistan and her brother's survival in Syria illustrated the far-reaching impact of Maria's work. The training methods she had developed were now being used to prepare soldiers for conflicts that had not even begun when she first engaged enemy fighters from a hillside overlooking a valley. As Maria's military career continued to evolve, she was selected for assignment to the Army War College, where she would study strategic leadership and prepare for potential promotion to senior non-commissioned officer positions. The assignment represented another opportunity to expand her influence and contribute to military development at the highest levels. The War College assignment also provided Maria with time to write a comprehensive manual on combat marksmanship that would serve as the definitive guide for military instructors around the world. The manual would include not only technical shooting techniques, but also the psychological and leadership principles that made her training methods so effective. "Effective marksmanship training," Maria wrote in the introduction to her manual, "is ultimately about building confidence and competence that extend far beyond shooting skills. When soldiers know they can hit their targets accurately and consistently, they approach all challenges with greater confidence and determination." The manual that Maria produced during her War College assignment became required reading for marksmanship instructors throughout the Army and was translated into multiple languages for use by Allied militaries. It represented the culmination of her professional knowledge and experience, distilled into a format that could benefit future generations of military trainers. After completing her studies at the War College, Maria was assigned to the Pentagon as the senior advisor for marksmanship training and development. The position placed her at the center of military policy making and gave her the opportunity to influence training standards for the entire Army. In her Pentagon role, Maria worked with senior leaders to develop long-term strategies for maintaining and improving military marksmanship capabilities. She advocated for increased training resources, improved equipment, and expanded instructor development programs that would ensure the Army could meet future challenges. The responsibilities of her Pentagon assignment were significant, but Maria never lost sight of the individual soldiers who would benefit from improved training. She regularly visited training centers around the world to observe instruction firsthand and gather feedback from students and instructors. During one such visit to a training center in South Korea, Maria encountered a young supply coordinator who reminded her of herself during her early military career. The soldier was competent and dedicated in her logistics duties, but seemed to have additional potential that was not being fully utilized. "What's your background with firearms?" Maria asked the young soldier during a break in the training schedule. "Ma'am, I grew up hunting with my father in rural Pennsylvania. I've been shooting since I was 10 years old, but I've never had any formal military marksmanship training." Maria smiled, recognizing a familiar story. "Would you be interested in attending some advanced training sessions while I'm here? I think you might have more potential than your current assignment allows you to demonstrate." 3 months later, the supply coordinator was accepted into the Advanced Combat Marksmanship course at Fort Hood. 6 months after that, she was selected for specialized training as a marksmanship instructor. Her career transformation followed a path that was remarkably similar to Maria's own journey from logistics to training excellence. The ability to identify and develop hidden talent among military personnel became one of Maria's signature contributions to Army leadership. She established mentorship programs that connected experienced instructors with promising young soldiers, regardless of their current military occupations. "One of the most important things we can do as senior leaders," Maria told audiences at leadership conferences, "is to look beyond job titles and assigned duties to recognize the full potential of our personnel. Some of our most effective soldiers are currently serving in roles that don't fully utilize their capabilities." As Maria approached the 20-year mark in her military career, she began to think about her legacy and the long-term impact of her contributions to military training. The Advanced Marksmanship Training Center at Fort Hood had become a permanent institution that would continue to develop instructors long after her retirement. Her training methods had been adopted by militaries around the world and were being used to prepare soldiers for conflicts that had not yet begun. But Maria knew that her most important legacy was not the institutions she had built or the manuals she had written. Her greatest contribution was proving that exceptional performance could emerge from any background, and that the military's strength came from its ability to recognize and develop talent wherever it existed. The young woman who had learned to shoot cans-off fence posts on her grandfather's ranch had become a master sergeant whose influence extended around the world. The supply coordinator who had made 11 perfect shots to save Alpha Company had transformed into a leader whose training methods were saving countless lives on battlefields she would never see. As Maria looked toward the future, she knew that her journey was far from over. There were still soldiers to train, instructors to develop, and military capabilities to improve. But she also knew that the most important lessons of her career had been learned on a hillside in Afghanistan, where a young woman had to choose between following orders and doing what she believed was right. The choice to act, to take risks, and to exceed expectations had defined not only that crucial moment but her entire subsequent career. It was a lesson that Maria would carry with her for the rest of her military service and beyond, A reminder that greatness often emerges from ordinary people who find themselves in extraordinary situations and choose to rise to the occasion. In quiet moments, Maria still thought about her grandfather and the simple wisdom he had shared with her about shooting, service, and character. His lessons had guided her from a ranch in Texas to the Pentagon, from counting supplies to training soldiers, from obscurity to international recognition. Most importantly, they had taught her that the measure of a person was not their job title or assigned duties, but their willingness to do whatever was necessary to help others and serve something greater than themselves. Those lessons would guide her leadership of the training center and ensure that every student who passed through the program understood that marksmanship was ultimately about protecting fellow soldiers and completing the missions that saved Alpha Company. Everything else in her career would be measured against that moment when she had to choose between following orders and saving lives, and had chosen to do what she believed was right regardless of the consequences. Santos, I've been a ranger for 15 years, and I've never seen shooting like that. You saved every one of my soldiers today, and I'm going to make sure that everyone knows it. 45 minutes felt like an eternity when Maria could hear the battle raging in the distance. She knew that a lot could happen in 45 minutes, and not all of it would be good. As she watched through her spotting scope, Maria began to develop a clearer picture of what was happening to Alpha Company.